Hello everyone and welcome to the 9th episode of Bootstrap version 5.3 tutorial series for beginners, floating labels. And the first thing we are going to jump into is, let me give you an example what floating labels are. And here we have Visual Studio Code, and we'll be using Visual Studio Code throughout our series. If you need to learn more about VS Code, you can watch my VS based series and find the link in the description below. Let me open our Explorer and let's make a copy of our sample.html. Let's rename it as bootstrap floating labels. Alright, and I'm gonna close our Explorer and let's select all the instances of this sample text with the hotkey controller Command D, and let's change this to say floating label. Hit save and let's open this document in the browser with the help of our live server extension, and let's wait for 1000 million years to open this document in the browser, and it's not coming up. So here we have floating labels.html. Let's keep both the windows side by side. Alright, and I'm gonna resize our editor as well. That looks pretty fine now, I guess. Alright, so let me resize it a little more. Alright, that looks perfect, and I'm also gonna wrap our editor with the hotkey Alt-Option-Z. That's great. Now let's add first floating label, and we already have a heading, and let's add a let's add a period as well. Form-floating with margin bottom -3, and inside I'm gonna add input with form-control class, and let's have an attribute id equals to floating input, and the type 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 would be email. Alright, and I am also going to add here placeholder, and that will be name at example.com. That's great, and I'm also gonna add a label here, label, label with an attribute for, and let's copy the value of id and let's paste that as a value of 4 attribute for our label tag. And then I'm also gonna add here some content, say email address. Alright, and hit enter. That's what we get. Let me scroll all the way up and hit save, and we have something like this. Let me increase the size. Let me close this instance of our browser and let me resize it, and let me see where did I go wrong. We have label div, we have a div with form floating. Alright, so here is a typo mistake. This should be floating, so I'm gonna undo that, and let's come in here and fix it. Let's add an here, form floating, and let's make this work again. Hit save. What floating labels are: if you click on your input box, the label floats to the upper left corner of the box. And now let's go to VS Code, and I'm gonna undo that, and let's make a copy, and I'm gonna comment this out, and let's make this one work for you. Hit save, And the next thing that I want to talk about is going to be input with values. Say if there is a value already defined, labels will automatically adjust to their floated position. Let me show you what I mean. First, I'm gonna copy, let's select this whole block of code and make a copy, and I'm gonna add here a heading here. Let's make this a floating hyphen label with value. And what I'm gonna do here, let's add only one thing as an attribute, say value. I'm gonna add value here. The value would be my at example.com. Hit save, and if you notice, now we have value already defined and our floating label is also there and it will show up always. So I'm gonna undo that. Sorry, let's redo it and let's move on. Now after that, we are going to move on to how you can also use floating labels with text areas. So I'm gonna copy this from here. So let's select this whole block of code, make a copy, and I'm gonna change the comment and the heading here. Let's make this, I don't find any comment here, why? Alright, let's undo that and select this whole block of code and make a copy, and let's change this comment as well as the heading. So I'm gonna call this floating labels with text area. Hit save. So this is what we have here, and let's make this, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna remove this input for now, and let's add here text area, area, with form control class, and let's add a placeholder holder, and the value would be within quotes because we are going to have space within our text. So let's type in here, please leave me a comment here, and let's add ID as well, and that would be floating input. All right, that looks good so far. Hit enter and hit save. Now we have got text area with floating label, and I am going to undo that, and let's keep this expression for you, and let's make this one work for us. Hit save. All right, now after that, what I want to do is something called form select. Other than form control, floating labels are only available on form selects. They work in the same way, but unlike inputs, they'll always show the label in its floated state. So let's come in here, and what I'm gonna do is let's copy this block of code, and let's call this with, say, form select hyphen select. Hit save. Alright, so we have got floating labels with form select, and what I'm gonna do is let's cut this line of code from here, and I am also going to remove this text area, and let's take this all the way up, and then I am going to add here select followed by period, and let's add a class here, form hyphen select, and then I'm gonna add ID equals to floating input, and inside that select let's have a couple of options. We'll have copies, so let's add a couple of parentheses and let's type in here option with value equals to say option colon followed by dollar to represent the number of copies, and let's make 3 copies, I guess. Alright, hit save and see what we get now. Alright, so we forgot to add content here. Let's undo that, and I am going to add content here as well. So let's add curly braces, and within I'm gonna add option colon dollar and see if it works. Hit enter. Alright, so we get select with the floated label. Let's get back to VS Code, and I'm gonna undo it, and let's make a copy of this EMMET expression, and let's this one work for us. Hit save. Now another important thing in floating labels is it also supports input group. So for that, what I'm gonna do is let's go all the way up, or yes, let's go all the way up, and I am going to copy this line of code from here. I'm gonna copy this block of code, and let's go all the way down, and let's add a heading here, and let's type in here floating labels with input group. Alright, and I'm gonna paste what we have recently copied. Hit save and see everything's there. Alright, so let's add, we have a form floating, and I am going to add a span here with a class span, with a class say input hyphen group, and let's add a content here as at. Alright, it's not working. I don't know why EMMET is not working. Let's cut that from here, and I'm going to add a span tag, and let's add at here, and I'm gonna add a class of input group. Let's add here input group text, sorry, input hyphen group hyphen text, input group text. Alright, and now let's I'm gonna add an extra line here. Alright, and what I'm gonna do is let's select everything from here, span as well, and let's wrap this block of code with input, sorry, period input hyphen group with margin bottom 3. Hit save, and we don't get that. Okay, and let me find out the issue. Form floating, we have got input group, and then we have input group text, input group with margin bottom, and we have input group text, then we have form floating. So I'm gonna remove this margin bottom for now. Save. Alright, so that fixes the issue. We had this margin bottom added here to this form floating div. So let's remove this margin bottom from here and hit save, so that fixes an issue. So that's how floating labels also work with input groups. Now the final thing I want to talk about is going to be how you can customize floating labels. So for that, let's go to, I am going to open Bootstrap documentation, and let's maximize our browser for now, and let's find here floating labels. Click on this link and go to SASS variables section, and here we have various variables that you can use to customize floating labels. So for an idea, we are going to have FORM-FLOATING-LABEL-OPACITY. So let's take this variable for an idea. Let's copy, and I'm gonna undock this browser, this tab for now, and let's minimize it, and let's resize our browser. Alright, and go back to VS Code, and I'm gonna open our main.scss, and let's add the variable that we have just copied, and make sure your watch SASS extension is working, and let's save the file. And it will take around 100,000 million years to generate the file with the default. So this is the opacity that we have for floating labels in floated state. So right now this is set to 0.65 by default, so let's make this 0.1, hit save, and again you will need to wait for no time. And if you click here now, if you see that it has changed the opacity level to 10%. And let's get back to VS Code, and I'm gonna comment this settings out, and let's save to restore the default styling. And if you have any question, you just feel free to comment below. And that was all about floating labels. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.